What's up, y'all? Hope everybody's well. Hope you had a good weekend. Welcome back to the grind. Black Masculinist news for the day. Welcome back to the Onyx Report. I'm your stalwart host here to walk you through some of the most relevant information as it pertains to Black men and boys and the push to advocate for them using critical analysis. Now, real quick, I wanted to show you, I got a couple of new additions to the menagerie back here. But the one that I'm really waiting on won't come for another week. Still, got a small one. I couldn't get it in better focus. I apologize. But if you see the shield right here, this is actually the Isaiah Bradley Black Captain America shield. And it is the main reason why I had the, Steve Rogers shield, because nobody was making the Isaiah Bradley one. So I managed to find somebody who made one. It's not the same quality, but hey, it's better than nothing. So I kind of wanted to show it off a little bit. Still, I got some other goodies coming that my fellow geeks will appreciate, But yeah. So shout out to the Isaiah Bradley Black Captain America representing, getting my geek on. What's up, Donnie? Hope you're well. Let's see who we got in here. Christopher, Ron, what's going on? It looks like a real low number day today. I don't know what's going on. I feel like I'm missing something big, but half the day today I didn't realize was actually Monday. That's how off the game I am. I still thought it was Sunday because my son is out of school for the day. Let me get this back. Here we go. Yeah, we'll leave it there. Okay. Kind of celebrate the shield for a moment. So yeah, my boy was in there. He had his friends come through for the day, one of whom was a female. I was like, oh, okay. First, I was a little proud, and then I was like, I had this moment where I went from proud father to understanding my parents. I went from kind of nodding like, yeah, to I ain't ready to be a grandfather now. It was a weird little moment. And, the thing my parents have probably been waiting for me to feel their pain. Because God knows I probably should have gave them a couple grandkids with how I was at his age. So he hasn't given me anywhere near as many problems as I gave my mother. Anyway, we all good. So I hope you guys are well. What's up, Kay? Yeah, appreciate that. Hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, join, donate, support the channel if you would. What's going on, Tim? Appreciate that support in there. Got a couple things to get into today. A couple of pieces that I wanted to share with you, dealing with the question of men's rights, men's politics, and what we think about men's politics. And there's a couple articles that ran across my desk that I think point us in a direction that we need to take seriously. So the first one deals with a piece you can find on 1819news.com. House Judiciary Committee advances child custody reform bill. It's a picture of Representative Kenneth Pascal. Alabama House of Representatives Judiciary Committee gave a favorable report Wednesday to legislation that would reform how Alabama's judges determine child custody. The bill would set joint custody as the standard for two fit parents, but would allow judges to deviate from that standard if they can explain their justification for doing so in writing. House Bill 365 is sponsored by State Representative Kenneth Pascal, Republican. The bill was scheduled to have had a public hearing in committee on March 2nd. That public hearing did not happen because the committee did not get through with its business before recessing to go into regular session. The rescheduled public hearing was held on March 9th, but the committee did not vote that day because it is the policy of the committee to not vote on the day of the public hearing. Pascal has been working on this issue for 14 years, first as a parent who had an unpleasant experience in his own daughter's custody hearing with the courts, then as the president of the Alabama Family Rights Association, and finally in the legislature. It was a long process spanning years on the Hill, educating legislatures, governors, and whoever else would listen about Alabama's unfair and lopsided custody laws and practices, Pascal said in a statement. He said that he plans to see this bill pass into law, ensuring all Alabama's children have the best of what the family court system has to offer, particularly their right to love and be loved by both their fit parents. It's simple, Pascal told the committee. If we want to see less violence, less criminal behavior in our communities, reduce our prison population, reduce teen pregnancies, see less behavior problems in school, and better outcomes for all communities, let's follow the social science data. And the social science data he's referring to basically argues that the presence of fathers, presence of men in their children's lives, especially in the Black community, has a positive impact on a number of different fronts, some of which are listed here. I talked about this a little bit the other day, but I don't think I went into the full article. Right? Pascal referenced statistics from national and worldwide studies that he claimed showed how much children benefit from strong and consistent relationships and time spent with both parents. See, they're doing a lot of tap dancing here. Both parents. This is code for fathers. That's really what this is. Pascal said in a statement that when a child is raised in a single parent or court ordered to have one parent, the child is 5 times more likely to live in poverty, 3 times more likely to fail in school, 2 to 3 times more likely to develop emotional and behavioral problems, 3 times more likely to commit suicide. Right? Pascal said that according to Alabama DHR and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, children with limited or no contact with one of their biological parents make up 63% of youth suicides, 75% of juvenile drug abuse, 85% of youths in prison, 71% of school dropouts, 71% of teen pregnancies, 90% of homeless and runaway children. Right? We have prison overcrowding, the need for prison reform, Pascal said. We have children with identity problems, teenage drug use, increased violence in our communities. We express concerns about school behavior issues in communities of color. So far, have we ever attributed these issues to our current family laws? Pascal claimed that current family law practices force approximately 40,000 children in Alabama to suffer the loss of one of their biological parents by choosing a parent who is deemed by the court as the favorable parent. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Pascal said that these problems are even worse in the Black community. Here in Alabama, our Black sons and daughters make up the majority of those children. We now know that we are partially responsible for one parent, mostly fathers, to be separated for their children. We must do something about it. This bill is a start. Alabama Family Rights Association supports HB 365. This bill will assure the courts apply the wordage created by the Alabama Law Institute in every divorce/custody hearing by requiring written findings of fact and evidence presented, said ALFRA President Tim Smith. A rebuttable presumption that joint custody is in the best interests of the child will also assure that children have access to a parent limited only under proven circumstances. Hopefully, the legislature will move quickly to place HB 365 into law and require all Alabama courts ruling on custody to do so in the true best interests of the child. It's controversial, HB 365 that is, because many Alabama's elected judges feel that it limits their discretion in these decisions. House of Representatives can consider HB 365 when they are next in session. Right? They won't meet again until March 29th. Right? Salute Hybrid. How you doing? Hope all is well. Right? Yeah, Christopher, that's a Republican. You know, but see, this is the thing. This is why I think we have to, as if we're going to be Black male justice advocates, and if we're going to push for politics that and policy that advocates for men and boys, we got to do an Ice Cube. You got to roll with who's willing to sit at the table. That is what it is. Right? So this is one of them. Like I said, I talked about it the other day, but it's still important. Right? Here's another one. This you can find on Fox 13 Memphis. Right? Yeah. All right. So, bill could make it mandatory for unmarried fathers to take DNA tests to sign birth certificate. Ooh, right. March 16th of this year, Memphis, Tennessee, a bill proposed in the state legislature could make it mandatory for fathers out of wedlock to take a DNA test before signing the birth certificate. House Bill 2698 is sponsored by State Representative Antonio Parkinson, who represents Memphis. This is a big deal. This is an issue that needs to be fixed, he said. Parkinson said the concept of this bill came from a haircut trip. I was in the barbershop and this man stopped me. He said he was in a long-term relationship. They had a child. They were living together at the time, he said. He said that the man went on to say that after the kid turned 5, he found out his partner had an affair, and a DNA test later revealed the man was not the child's father. Right? So, paternity fraud, more than likely. When they went to court over the child support, he presented the DNA evidence. The magistrate basically banged the gavel down and said, somebody's got to feed him, and it's going to be you until he ages out of child support, said Parkinson. Right? See, basically, the fundamental idea here is that by changing policy, you can thus change behavior over time. If mothers knew that there was a repercussion for making these kinds of decisions, i.e., the arbitrary choosing of a father, regardless of who the biological father actually is, there'd be a shift in behavior if they knew repercussions were to come. What happens if not only if the non-biological father wasn't responsible for child support, but filing or at least leaving a father with the impression that he's the father, especially to coerce him into signing the birth certificate, actually came with penalties? How would behavior change over time with that? What would happen if false paternity was addressed, even if it was only in similar fashion to what happens when you don't pay child support, have your driver's license taken, things of that nature? How would that incite a response, right? See, right now there are no repercussions for mothers. They can do whatever they want, and they know you're stuck. So even the moment he signed it, he didn't have to stay there another 5 years. She had him. And this is why we advocate for, the political support of Black men and boys. At some point, you've got to be able to put some protections on the book so that even if you're coerced into signing the birth certificate, if you're not the biological father, or if you've been misled, lied to, so on and so forth, not only should you be able to know with a DNA test, you should be able to have the choice to withdraw from the situation. That should be an option. We're going to talk about, well, we might as well do it now since we're here. You guys know lately, especially, I've been dealing with, political issues. And so I take you back to the Black Male Political Agenda. You can find this on newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com, right? This was put together by the Brotherhood of the Onyx Report over the last 2 years. And we started to put together a list of policy suggestions, ideas, proposals that work in the interest of Black men. And the first of over 13 is family court reform. What's up, Micah? Good to see you in here. Keep it 100. What's going on? Green Gorilla. Always good to see you, brother. I know that haircut trip ain't, hey, that's the political space. That's the political space. I ain't mad at it. All right. So we got, the first step. So point 1A is child custody should be 50-50. Right. That was the first article I read. 1B, mandatory paternity testing at birth. Prior to signing the birth certificate, newborn children should be given a DNA test to assure the parentage of the father, thus avoiding men being unjustly responsible for supporting children under false pretenses. This should be required prior to any issuance of child support judgments. And then we had an addendum. Shout out to John for the support. Appreciate that, man. We had an addendum. Once determined that the father has been misled regarding the child's parentage, no matter how long it has been, meaning whether it's been a month or 18 years, he should be excused from both the birth certificate and child support. The exploited party should be subject to legally sanctioned reimbursement from the mother, the biological father, and relevant city, state, or federal government. Right? You put some penalties on the books and see if behavior changes. See if there's not a greater emphasis on mothers identifying fathers, being forthright about who the father is, because there are financial penalties if it doesn't happen. And we already know that when it comes to child support, fathers most particularly are punished indefinitely if they fall into arrears. I've said this to you guys several times. I have a stepfather right here in Fresno in his 70s, still paying child support that he fell into arrears on for a child who is my age, my stepbrother Jay, my age. He's a month younger than me. His mother passed away in the early 90s. And my stepfather is still paying child support for a grown-ass man to a mother that's passed away. Now, obviously, that money goes to the state because he was in arrears. She wouldn't get it if she were alive. But he's still paying on it in his 70s with cancer. There's no end to the punishment that fathers have to face if they're deemed, right, the father, and thus fall into arrears. But no punishments at all for mothers? My argument is, if a mother has misrepresented the facts on the case, and she has to be in her 70s reimbursing the state for child support, i.e. reimbursing the father for 18 years of payments, I don't see the problem. If you don't see the problem with fathers doing it, why should I see the problems with mothers doing it? And as Dave Chappelle quipped, if I'm wrong, maybe we're both wrong. Meaning that either both of them should have to pay it or neither. But leaving it in this one-way fashion where fathers own the bulk of the weight, even if misrepresented, even if lied to. And we've seen the statistics go from anywhere from 10% to 70% in terms of false paternity internationally, from America to Jamaica to Africa. The misrepresentation, even to Britain, the misrepresentation of paternity ranges all over the board. But there's still no protections for fathers in any significant manner that I've seen so far internationally. And you can see a number of the other policies here: reinstituting at-fault divorce standards, financial abortion, child support value system, right to lifestyle, require formal child support management reports, prohibit jailing for failure to pay child support, income floor child support and alimony assistance program, tax filing options. Yeah, brothers were thorough. A through K, subpoints to the first item on the black male political agenda, family court reform. Right? So getting back to the article, right? It says, when they went to court over child support, he presented the DNA evidence. The magistrate basically banged the gavel down and said, somebody's got to feed him, and it's going to be you until he ages out of child support. He said the man ended up having to pay up to 5 years in child support as a result, and ended up losing his license. I just say his job, and going to jail temporarily as a result. These are punishments to the poor. That's essentially what this is. Punishments to the poor. If you're too poor to afford it, you're punished, right, for not having it. And there's another factoid that I want to give you about this, so bear with me for a second. Let me scroll down here. Yeah. So when we start talking about being punished for the poor, if you look up Dr. David J. Pate, Associate Professor of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I quote him here when talking about child support. You know what? I'll put it on the screen. Right here at the bottom. I see. Hold on. Let me get it for you so you guys can see it. There you go. 20% of the people in this system shouldn't be in there because they're too poor. Those $10,000 or even $20,000 earners, the government, according to Pate, is owed $115 billion in child support, but 70% of that money is owed by Americans who make less than $10,000 a year. This child support racket, as we understand it, is the criminalization of the poor. And here's the other thing. Even if you're a 15, 16-year-old kid experimenting with sex and you accidentally get a woman pregnant, it is literally up to her whim whether or not the next 18 years of your life, in terms of what happens to it, it's up to her. It's at her whim. You have no protections. She can make a whimsical decision either way, and your entire life changes over just being a kid. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot to leave in the hands of one person, which is one of the reasons we have the financial abortion on here as well. Men should have the option. Women, if women have the choice as to whether or not they're going to involve their body, men should have the choice as to whether or not they want to be involved altogether. It takes two to make a child, but women have all kinds of options about what they want to do. Men have none. His whole life is in her hands with no protections. And if he makes less than $10,000 a year, he could experience all the things that we've just heard from this gentleman here. Right? Losing his driver's license, job, and going to jail because he couldn't afford to pay it, which over 70% of the debt owed to the government as far as child support by people that make less than 10,000. So we know that they're experiencing these very issues. House Bill 2698 will make it so that if a prospective father wants to voluntarily sign a birth certificate, he has to provide DNA test results first. Parkinson said this doesn't only apply. This doesn't only impact Memphis. The rural district attorneys were looking for somebody to carry legislation to start reforming our child support system because it's rural guys getting hit with these same laws and it's hurting them. Parkinson said this bill will next be heard by the Civil Justice House Committee next week, and it will be on the Senate floor Thursday morning. All right. I want to look up, before I go forward, I do want to look up Representative Antonio Parkinson. Let's see something real quick. All right. Born in Oakland? Yeah. Okay, he's an American politician and a Democratic member of the Tennessee House of Representatives. So this is interesting. So between both articles, we got a Republican and a Democrat. Republican is pushing for, the option to reform child custody in terms of 50-50 custody. And the Democrat is pushing to make DNA testing mandatory upon signing the birth certificate. This is why I just got through saying that we have to be somewhat apolitical and strategic about who's ever willing to push the policies we're interested in, especially if they want our votes. And that also means that when it comes to Black men and voting, we're the most disenfranchised voting group, primarily because of incarceration. Many of us have been stripped from the right to vote. And we need to actually challenge that as well. So it strengthens the power of the Black male vote, makes us more seductive in terms of groups wanting to barter for our votes. This is the game. This is the game it is. Rick Simmons, thanks for that support. It's great for information as always, right? So, like I said, we got a Republican, we got a Democrat, both pushing for policies that many of us advocate. Now, earlier, I mentioned reading the first article. It talked about the inclination toward mothers, right, getting custody. I want to show you something very briefly in regard to this inclination. This is just one study. There are plenty of them. Let's study to look up, right? Gender stereotypes underlie child custody decisions. This is a research article written by Luisa Lopez Franco Costa, Ana Beatriz Dillon Estevez, Roxana Krimer, Noel Stuchiner, and Ivar Hanakainen. I know I butchered some of those names, but for those of you that are interested, I put the information on the screen. And basically what this study did is, well, I'll just go through the abstract. Using hypothetical divorce cases, we examine the role of gender stereotypes in decisions about child custody. Good mothers receive greater custody allocations than did good fathers across a tightly matched pair of vignettes in 3 culturally distinct samples, one in Argentina, one in Brazil, and one in the United States. Study 1, the 2 follow-up studies, indicated that the warmth, this dimension of stereotype content, partly accounted for the asymmetry in custody awards. The proportion of maternal primary custody was predicted by the tendency to ascribe warmth-related traits such as friendliness, generosity, or trustworthiness to mothers. Right. So basically, the first part of 3 components of the study figured out that this idea of warmth is what prioritizes women in the minds of people as far as who should be the better parent. And we assume, right? That women are inherently warmer than men as it relates to motherhood, as it relates to parenthood. And because of that assumption, this undergirds some of the decision to decide which parent should automatically get custody, as opposed to coming to the conclusion that a 50-50 custody framework should just be the default position. The assumption is because mothers are warmer and tend to be friendlier, more generous, and more trustworthy, that they should be the parent. So that's one of the stereotypes that they're studying. The study two, the second part of it, and associate them with female over male nouns. Right. So basically, the various terms that they use to identify warmth, they describe as female traits. And lastly, we also found that endorsing shared custody mitigated the asymmetry in custody awards documented in our studies. Together, these results highlighted the interplay of stereotyped attitudes and egalitarian commitments in the context of judicial decisions about child custody. I know that's a mouthful, but basically, it just means that as a society, and a matter of fact, this is not limited to the US. As I said, it also includes Argentina and Brazil. We tend to make these assumptions. Now, whether or not we want to argue that mothers and women in general have more maternal qualities because it's in their DNA, that's one thing. It's another thing when it comes to a court of law deciding who should get custody of the child, because who determined that warmth was the only significant factor in parenting? I mean, men are generally more associated with discipline. Discipline doesn't need to be a bad thing, and it doesn't need to be associated with abuse. But undergirding all of these ideas, there's a basic premise as it relates to gender, that women are inherently good, men are inherently bad. Women are inherently pure, men are inherently abusive. It's it's a Victorian kind of idea of gender, and it's still playing out in ways that, you know, damage in many respects men. Now, I'm gonna show you one of the charts from this study. And just to break it down real quick, the yellow parts of the chart are fathers, the blue greenish parts are mothers. And so what they did, the top row is for Argentina, the middle row is for Brazil, the bottom row is for the USA. And as far as density and custody, think of it this way. So you can see density has to do with where the majority of the decisions lied as far as which parent got custody. And so in the middle, you got they lost. In the left side, you got that they lost. In the middle, that they shared. And on the right, that they won. And this had to do with the particular occupations associated with them. So we just go through it very quickly. On the left column, these three items on the left, right? If the mother or father was a nutritionist or a professor, or nutritionist and a professor, right? You can see that in terms of who won custody more often, going to the right side in blue, tended to be the mothers. Shared custody, you found the most as it related to fathers and mothers in Brazil and the US, right? To the greatest degree. In Argentina, it was the mothers. Now, as far as the cashier and driver scenario, see a slightly different, well, not too different. On the right, you still have a majority of mothers, but you got shared custody with a greater sampling of mothers, right? Except for in Argentina, right? So you can see the kinds of gendered stereotypical attitudes as it relates to occupations tied to particular countries and the judgment on who gets custody. But in the US, the majority of the custody you can see on both sides, regardless of occupation, tended to be mothers. So I'm just getting to here, these kinds of ideas undergird how we practice policy. It's what I consider to be a kind of retained chivalry that plays out politically. And because it plays out in terms of policy, it plays out in terms of how those policies are carried out. And they tend to adversely impact men. What's up, Ray? How you doing? Let's see. Yeah, Tim. Argentina seems to be. Let's see. I know I'm missing a good number of you in here, right? But this is what we're looking at. If we're in a dynamic where our assumptions lead us to policy that is heavily gendered in a manner that depicts men as monsters and women as pure angels, you can see the fallout of that. And in terms of the first article we covered, the fallout of that disproportionately impacts men. Kenneth Pascal's statements, about the ways in which this punishes men and puts them in an adverse situation they don't need to be in, at the expense of the child's well-being, is what the agenda needs to be about. Yes, it is also about, advocating for men and boys, demanding equality in terms of that. But if the data shows that this actually benefits the children, all the more reason to support it. And this is the kind of engagement we need to have. Now, I'm all for people talking about relationships and sex and all kind. I mean, it is what it is. We all deal with those issues too. But the disproportionate amount of attention we spend arguing about sex and relationships, I mean, to me, we got to elevate the discussion and take it to the next level. And BGS said something in a recent video, and I got to shout him out for it. He even brought my name into it. But he said, at the end of the day, people complain that they want to see more content, a variety of issues covered in relation to men and what men are going through. And yet, when you got brothers up here who are creating that content, what's the support? 98 people watching. Appreciate each and every one of you. But if I had to live just off of YouTube, like some YouTubers are doing, I'd be starving. Now, I get that YouTube is an entertainment platform, but at the same time, it is necessary that we actually got to use whichever platforms we can to actually organize, mobilize, and create what we want to see happen in society. Because here's the thing, if you want to change in behavior in terms of, say, even just relationships, when you change the policies, you will change the behavior because you've changed the environment. And if women's behavior is reined in by repercussions that they don't want to have to suffer, then they have to deal with you on different terms. But if there are no repercussions, they run roughshod because they can. And that's within human nature. People do what they can get away with. Doesn't even necessarily have to be evil. It just has to do with the fact that it's available to them. And if it's at your expense, there's nothing to stop them. So anyway, that said, I just wanted to drop that on you, give y'all something to think about. As usual, very interested in reading your thoughts, your reflections, questions. And if you have some additional data that may either add to this or give us a reason to see it differently, please make sure you put it in the comments section. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a good one. Peace.